The small cardboard box trembled violently as federal wildlife officers carried it through the entrance of Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. Inside, a terrified 4-month-old bobcat kitten pressed himself into the corner, his amber eyes wide with fear and confusion. This was not supposed to be his fate. Just hours earlier, he had been ripped away from the only home he had ever known, confiscated from illegal smugglers who had planned to sell him as an exotic pet to the highest bidder. What nobody could have predicted was that this traumatized orphan, soon to be named Rascal, would become the unlikely teacher for a broken lioness who had never experienced a single moment of joy in her 9 years of captivity. If you love stories about the incredible bonds that form between animals against all odds, please subscribe to Wild Heart Stories. Every subscription helps us share more heartwarming tales of animal connections that remind us of the healing power of love in the natural world. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head veterinarian at Lincoln Park Zoo, had seen many confiscated animals arrive at their facility over her 15-year career, but something about this particular case troubled her deeply. The federal officers explained that the bobcat had been kept in deplorable conditions by wildlife traffickers operating out of a basement apartment on Chicago's South Side. The kitten had been taken from his mother far too early, probably at only 6 weeks old, and had been fed an improper diet that left him malnourished and undersized for his age. As Dr. Martinez carefully lifted the small bobcat from the transport box, she could feel his tiny heart racing against her gloved hands. His gray and brown spotted coat was dull from poor nutrition, and his characteristic ear tufts were barely visible due to his young age. Despite his fear, there was something remarkably spirited about this little creature. Even in his terrified state, his eyes held a brightness that suggested a strong will to survive. The bobcat was immediately placed in quarantine, where Dr. Martinez conducted a thorough examination. The kitten was severely underweight, dehydrated, and showed signs of stress-related behavioral problems. Most concerning was his complete lack of natural hunting instincts or appropriate responses to human presence, clear evidence that he had been hand-raised inappropriately from birth. Kevin Thompson, the senior big cat keeper at Lincoln Park Zoo, was struck by the animal's unusual boldness when he first met the bobcat. Unlike most wildcats who would cower or become aggressive when approached by humans, this kitten actually seemed curious about people, even purring when gently handled. It was both heartwarming and deeply sad, clear evidence of how his natural instincts had been compromised by inappropriate human contact. During his first week in quarantine, the staff struggled to find an appropriate name for their newest resident. He was incredibly active despite his health problems, constantly exploring every corner of his enclosure and attempting to climb anything within reach. His favorite activity seemed to be ambushing the cleaning equipment that staff brought into his space, pouncing on mops and brooms with surprising ferocity for such a small creature. Finally, Kevin suggested the name Rascal, which seemed to perfectly capture the kitten's mischievous personality. As Rascal began to recover physically, his true character emerged. He was undeniably intelligent, quickly learning to navigate enrichment toys and climbing structures. But what struck everyone most was his social nature. Unlike adult bobcats, which are typically solitary creatures, Rascal seemed to crave interaction and companionship. He would vocalize excitedly whenever staff members approached and would often press himself against the mesh of his enclosure, clearly seeking physical contact. Dr. Martinez consulted with wildlife rehabilitation experts across the country about Rascal's case. The consensus was troubling. Because he had been taken from his mother so young and raised inappropriately by humans, Rascal lacked the essential survival skills needed for release back into the wild. His lack of appropriate fear responses to humans made him unsuitable for traditional wildlife rehabilitation. The difficult decision was made that Rascal would become a permanent resident of the zoo. Meanwhile, in another section of the zoo, a very different kind of captive was living her own quiet existence. Majesty, a 9-year-old lioness, spent her days in the large African savanna exhibit that housed the zoo's pride. But unlike the other lions, who engaged in typical social behaviors, playing, grooming, and interacting with visitors, Majesty remained largely withdrawn and solitary. Majesty's history was heartbreaking. She had been born in captivity, but not at a reputable zoo. For the first 7 years of her life, she had been forced to perform in a traveling circus, spending her days in cramped cages and her nights under bright lights, being forced to jump through hoops and balance on platforms for the entertainment of crowds. The circus had obtained her illegally as a cub, and she had never experienced normal lion social development or maternal care. When animal welfare authorities finally shut down the abusive circus operation, Majesty was among dozens of animals that needed emergency placement. Lincoln Park Zoo had stepped forward to provide her with a permanent home, but the psychological damage from her years of abuse ran deep. Unlike lions raised in proper zoo environments, Majesty had never learned to play, had never experienced maternal instincts, and showed little interest in social interaction with either humans or other lions. Kevin had worked extensively with Majesty since her arrival 2 years earlier, but progress had been limited. She ate well, maintained good physical health, and tolerated the presence of the other lions in her pride, but she remained emotionally distant. She spent most of her time lying in the shade, watching the world around her with a detached, almost sad expression. Visitors often commented that she looked lonely despite being surrounded by other lions. The zoo's animal behaviorist had tried various enrichment activities to encourage Majesty to engage more naturally, but nothing seemed to spark her interest. She ignored toys, showed no curiosity about new scents or sounds, and never initiated play behavior with the other lions. It was as if her spirit had been broken by years of forced performance, leaving her unable to connect with her own natural instincts. After completing his quarantine period, Rascal was moved to a more permanent enclosure in the zoo's small carnivore section. Despite having much more space and stimulation, Rascal seemed restless in his new home. Dr. Martinez noticed that his pacing behavior was most pronounced during the early morning hours when staff members were conducting their daily rounds. It was clear that despite his comfortable enclosure and regular care, Rascal was lonely. The situation became more concerning when Rascal began showing signs of depression. His appetite decreased, and he spent more time sleeping during the day instead of exploring and playing. Young animals, especially those that had been hand-raised, often struggled with isolation. One morning in early October, about 6 weeks after Rascal's arrival, maintenance work was being conducted on the water systems throughout the zoo. This required temporary modifications to several enclosure gates and barriers. The construction crew followed all safety protocols, but they underestimated the persistence and dexterity of a determined 4-month-old Bobcat. Kevin discovered the problem when he arrived for his morning shift. Rascal was gone. Small scratches around the lock mechanism showed that Rascal had worked at the closure for some time, eventually managing to manipulate it enough to create an opening. An emergency search was launched, with staff members spreading throughout the zoo to locate the missing Bobcat. Dr. Martinez was particularly worried because Rascal lacked appropriate fear responses and might approach other dangerous animals without understanding the risk. Hours passed without any sign of him, and Kevin began to worry that Rascal might have somehow escaped the zoo grounds entirely. Just as the decision was made to expand the search beyond the zoo perimeter, a call came in from the African Savanna exhibit. Tom Wilson, one of the newer keepers, had been conducting his routine morning inspection of the lion pride when he noticed something unusual. There, In the large outdoor enclosure that housed the lions was what appeared to be a small gray and spotted shape moving near the rocks where Majesty typically spent her mornings. Kevin rushed to the lion exhibit, his heart pounding for fear for Rascal's safety. Lions were apex predators, and even a well-fed captive lion retained all of its natural hunting instincts. A 4-month-old bobcat would be seen as nothing more than prey. But when Kevin reached the viewing area that overlooked the lion enclosure, what he saw defied all logic and expectation. Rascal was indeed in the lion enclosure, but he was not cowering in fear or attempting to hide. Instead, the small bobcat was engaged in what could only be described as a careful investigation of Majesty, who was lying in her usual spot beneath a large artificial rock formation. What happened next would be talked about by zoo staff for years to come. Instead of treating Rascal as prey, Majesty did something completely unexpected. She opened her eyes and looked directly at the small bobcat, who had frozen in place about 3 feet away from her massive head. For a moment, that seemed to last forever, the two cats simply stared at each other. Then, Majesty did something she had never done in all her years at the zoo. She made a soft chuffing sound, a vocalization typically used by lions to communicate peaceful intentions to cubs or other pride members. It was a sound that none of the zoo staff had ever heard from her before. Rascal, displaying the fearless curiosity that had gotten him into this situation, took a tentative step closer to the lioness. When he was less than 2 feet away from her enormous head, he did something that made Kevin's heart skip a beat. The tiny bobcat reached out with one small paw and gently touched Majesty's nose. The lioness could have ended Rascal's life with a single swipe of her powerful paw, but instead, she did something that none of the zoo staff had ever witnessed in all her years of captivity. Majesty carefully lowered her head until it was resting on the ground, bringing herself down to Rascal's level. Then, with infinite gentleness, she touched his small forehead with her nose in what could only be described as a kiss. Kevin immediately radioed for Dr. Martinez and the emergency response team, instructing them to approach quietly. Within minutes, a small crowd of zoo staff had gathered at the observation deck, all watching in silent amazement as two very different cats engaged in an interaction that defied everything they understood about animal behavior. Dr. Martinez arrived with tranquilizer equipment, prepared to sedate one or both animals if the situation became dangerous. But as she observed the scene through her binoculars, she realized that no intervention was needed. Rascal had positioned himself directly in front of Majesty's face, and the lioness was gently grooming the small bobcat with her enormous tongue. It was unmistakably maternal behavior, the kind of gentle care that lionesses typically showed only to their own cubs. The zoo's animal behaviorist, Dr. Patricia Chen, was called in to provide expert analysis of what was occurring. She explained that both animals were displaying behaviors that suggested deep psychological needs were being met through their unlikely partnership. Majesty, having been denied the opportunity to experience motherhood throughout her 9 years of life, was responding to Rascal with powerful maternal instincts that had been suppressed for years. Meanwhile, Rascal was responding to Majesty as a surrogate mother figure, seeking the comfort and security that had been denied to him when he was taken from his biological mother far too early. The immediate question facing the zoo administration was how to handle this unprecedented situation. Allowing a small bobcat to remain in an enclosure with lions violated every safety protocol and standard practice in modern zoo management. Yet the beneficial effects on both animals were undeniable. After hours of careful observation, the decision was made to attempt a gradual separation. Kevin entered the lion enclosure carrying Rascal's favorite treats. Rascal immediately recognized Kevin and began moving toward him, but after taking several steps, he stopped and looked back at Majesty. The lioness had risen to her feet and was watching with obvious concern. What happened next surprised everyone involved. Instead of continuing toward Kevin and the promised treats, Rascal returned to Majesty's side and pressed himself against her front legs. The lioness immediately lowered her head to nuzzle the small bobcat, making soft vocalizations that were clearly meant to comfort and reassure him. It was as if she understood that humans were trying to take away the small creature who had brought such joy into her previously empty world. As evening approached, new concerns arose about the dropping temperature. Dr. Martinez and Kevin remained at the zoo past normal working hours, monitoring the two cats as darkness fell. What they observed reinforced their growing understanding that this was not simply a case of temporary curiosity or confused animal behavior. As the temperature dropped, Majesty carefully guided Rascal toward one of the heated indoor areas, using gentle nudging and soft vocalizations to direct his movements. She then positioned herself in a protective curve around the small bobcat, using her body heat and bulk to create a safe, warm environment for him to sleep. The sight of the massive lioness carefully sheltering the tiny bobcat was both beautiful and heartbreaking. It was clear that Majesty had found something in Rascal that filled a void in her life that years of professional animal care had been unable to address. Meanwhile, Rascal had discovered the maternal figure he had been seeking, someone who could provide not just comfort and warmth, but also the sense of belonging that every young animal needs to thrive. By morning, it had become clear that separating Rascal and Majesty would require more than simple animal management techniques. Dr. Chen spent the entire second day observing and documenting the interactions between the two cats. Her notes revealed behavior patterns that were unprecedented in the scientific literature on interspecies relationships. Majesty was not simply tolerating Rascal's presence. She was actively teaching him behaviors that were appropriate for her pride structure. She would gently correct him when his play became too aggressive, guide him toward food and water sources, and even demonstrate proper grooming techniques. Zoo administration faced mounting pressure to resolve the situation, yet every expert consulted agreed that attempting to separate the animals at this point could cause severe psychological damage to both. Dr. Martinez proposed a radical solution. Instead of forcing separation, the zoo would modify its protocols to accommodate this unique situation. A new enclosure would be designed that could house both animals safely while allowing their relationship to continue developing. As the days passed, both animals showed clear signs that their partnership had become essential to their well-being. Majesty displayed energy and engagement levels that exceeded anything documented since her arrival at the zoo. The most remarkable change came on the fifth morning when Kevin arrived to discover something extraordinary. Through the observation window, he watched in amazement as Majesty engaged in playful behavior typically seen only in cubs. She was crouched low to the ground, rear end elevated in the classic play position, tail swishing with excitement as she made soft vocalizations toward Rascal. In 20 years with lions, Kevin had never seen an adult display such joy and play, especially Majesty, who had never shown interest in any play behavior. The transformation in Majesty's appearance was as dramatic as her behavioral changes. Her coat developed a glossy sheen, her eyes sparkled with alertness, and she carried herself with newfound confidence.
The incident convinced the board of directors that Majesty and Rascal's relationship represented something far more sophisticated than simple companionship. Dr. Robert Harrison announced the board's decision to approve construction of a specialized enclosure allowing Majesty and Rascal to remain together permanently. The announcement generated international media attention. As winter approached, Majesty intuitively understood Rascal's vulnerability to temperature changes, spending more time in heated areas and positioning her body to shield him from wind during outdoor play. The depth of Majesty's protective instincts was tested when Rascal became ill with a respiratory infection. During his medical treatment and temporary separation, Majesty paced anxiously, vocalized constantly, and refused to eat. When reunited, her relief was profound. By the time spring arrived, the new enclosure was nearing completion, and both animals had continued to thrive. Rascal had grown significantly, his personality developing into a perfect balance of wild instincts and social behaviors learned from his time with Majesty. Majesty had undergone the most dramatic transformation of all. The withdrawn, traumatized circus performer had become a confident, nurturing mother figure who displayed all the natural behaviors that had been suppressed during her years of abuse and neglect. The story of Majesty and Rascal became a powerful reminder that healing and hope could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Two animals who had experienced abandonment, abuse, and trauma had found in each other the family and purpose that years of human care had been unable to provide. Their relationship demonstrated that love and companionship could transcend species barriers, and that the capacity for nurturing and protection existed even in animals who had been denied the opportunity to express these natural instincts. On a sunny morning in May, Majesty and Rascal were successfully moved into their new shared habitat, where they would continue to teach the world about the remarkable healing power of unconditional love and acceptance. Their story continues to inspire animal care professionals, researchers, and visitors from around the world, proving that sometimes the most profound healing occurs when broken hearts find each other against all odds.